Hi, Umbraco gang, it's me, Warren. It's been a while, but today we're going to talk about tag helpers and what they are. But rather than me trying to explain what they are, let's just jump straight into code, and it's best by doing. So come on, let's jump in and let's get hacking. Okay, so I have a very basic Umbraco site. External sources. It's a new one. Thanks, Visual Studio 22 or 2022. Anyway, I've got an Umbraco site or project, and I've just run it, and I've just added a very basic single document type here that is home with one property. You can see that it's just header, and then we have a very simple template that just spits out the header for now. So hence my beautiful design work. But that's not what we've come to talk about. We've come to talk about tag helpers. So let's create one. I want to, this is kind of, I suppose, the hello world of tag helpers, is to have something conditional. So if we was to stop the site and jump on in, so home. I want, I'm going to make up a tag. So obviously in HTML we have iframe and div and header one and things like that. I'm going to make my own tag. So I'm going to call it if. And then we're going to put this in there. And then I suppose we could have another if. And then we could give it a condition. So we could say something like string is null or empty for model header. If it's not, then obviously print it out, and then we could have an inverse here. But let's get cracking. Let's start making this. So what we need to do is to create a new class, and I am going to call this if tag helper. And this needs to inherit from tag helper. If we all enter, we get need to add the using from Microsoft ASP.NET Core.Razor.TagHelpers. Perfect. Then the next thing we need to do is add IntelliSense or auto completion is helping me here, but yeah, HTML. I need a HTML target element, and you can see there's two overloads to the attribute. The one I'm interested in is the one that I specify the tag. So I'm just going to do if, so that we can have if in our HTML or in our Razor. So that basically says anytime you find an if tag in a Razor view or template or partial, run this tag helper code. And what we want to do is we want to override the process. And this has two parameters. So the context is I suppose the tag or how the Razor page is before the code runs. So this would have the context of like knowing that it's the if tag, and the output is what we want to render down the HTML, down the wire. Obviously, there's no if tag that exists in HTML spec, and we don't want to render it down the line. So we're gonna do some code here. So first of all, let's add a property to the class, and we'll give it a boolean. Then we'll call this condition, and then we're gonna decorate this with an attribute that is HTML attribute name, and then we're going to say, well, this is the condition. So if So it would be if condition equals, it's the value in the condition attribute is what is going to be bound to this boolean. So cool. Right. So if excuse me, if the condition evaluates to false, so it's not truth or truthy, then what we want to do is set the output, and there's a method here called suppress output. And what that is doing is removing the tag, so the if tag and all its child elements inside that tag, so it doesn't get rendered out to the page. So that is relatively quite simple. However, there is one thing I forgot to do, because if this is evaluates to true, I don't want the markup to be rendered as if hello world or whatever I put in my if tag. I just want it to be hello world. So for that to happen, I need to do output dot tag name, and then we're just going to give it null, or it could be an empty string, and that will remove the surrounding tag from the tag helper. So that will get rid of that if. So we can set a breakpoint, and we can build. Can't use it just yet, so we can go back to the if, and we can say we could do string is null or empty model dot header equals false, or yeah. So if it has a value, then print it out, and yeah, so on. Nice, but if I run this, this is not going to work. We can see what happens. Well, let's see what happens. Okay, so the output at a quick glance doesn't look too bad, but if we was to inspect, I am guessing, yeah, we've got this sent down the wire, which is obviously invalid HTML, doesn't exist in the real world. So what happened? What went wrong? So what we need to do is go to our views folder and our underscore view imports Razor file here, and you can see there's this new HTML or Razor syntax even, sorry, which is at add tag helper, and the asterisk is saying include all tag helpers within this assembly. This is not a namespace, this is the assembly name. A little bit confusing because obviously Microsoft's one here looks like a namespace, but that is the assembly name that they do ship. So if we was to do our own add tag helper, and I'm going to say include all tag helpers that you find in this assembly, and our assembly name is the name of our project, which is in our case hack make do. And if I save that and then go back to home, I wish I'd kind of shown it previously, but you can see all the other tags are in this kind of blue, and now you can see that Visual Studio, or in the IDE, is now noticed that this is a tag helper. It's kind of like this teal color, and if I hover over it, I can get some slight IntelliSense. And if I was a good citizen, then I could do some summary. We can say this allows markup to be conditionally output to the page, and then the condition that needs to evaluate to true. And then if we was to build that, oh no, we're still running, and then hover back, or maybe not, maybe it needs to be built, we would have got IntelliSense at least about what the if tag helper does and what the condition attribute is. So you can see it's kind of lit up here. That is why it wasn't working because we hadn't added this line. So if we are to go back and refresh, and now let's inspect, you can see that that if surrounding tag has now disappeared, and we now get the output. So we could go back to our view. We could obviously do a quick inverse of this, and say I have no header set. We could save that. We could also do things like if the condition, I'm having to think here, actually use my head today. Let's, yes, we could do something along the lines of date time. I'm looking at some old notes I've got. UTC now, the minute, and if we divide that by 2, we'll see if we get an odd or an even number. If that is equal to 1, then we know that this, I am an odd minute. And if we do the same again and then say that we've got no remainders, then I am an even minute. So let's save that, refresh, and see what we get shown. So I am an even minute. Looking at the clock, it's 10:26. Yeah, we're an even minute. If we refresh, we're still in 10:26. Let's go and remove our content, save and publish. Refresh, you can see that the other conditional now kicked in, and if we look at the output, you can see that the other one's it's not commented out. It doesn't even get sent down the wire, so that you can see that's really kind of nice. We've gone to 10:27, so I should get an odd minute now. There we go, I'm an odd minute. Obviously that condition could be absolutely anything. So that is the hello world of tag helpers. What I want to show you next is that I've been doing a kind of community project of tag helpers. So let's take a look. First of all, actually, there's something else I would like to mention, is that .NET or ASP.NET comes with a bunch of tag helpers built in already. In my mind, the most interesting ones are the environment tag helper. So you could have maybe for development and staging, you could include unminified CSS and JavaScript. And when you're in a production environment, you could then include bundled and minified CSS or JavaScript. So that would be a nice, easy way to include or exclude based on the environment. And the environment, just as a reminder, is an environment variable, and we can set that locally as well. So he remembers, launch settings. So from my IIS profile, you can see the ASP.NET Core environment is set to development. I could set it to production. I could set it to any string. It works with just anything, but yeah. So that's how you would do that. That's a nice one to know. Next is the partial tag helper. So rather than having to do this await for the async, so rather await and then the HTML helper and then the partial async, you may prefer the syntax of having a partial. So you can see they've got a partial, you give it the name, which is the alias of the partial to render, and then you pass the model through as an attribute. If you use this one in conjunction with the next one I'm going to show you, it kind of removes the need of our own HTML cached partial async method that we have in Umbraco. If you can use these in conjunction, so if you was to wrap this partial tag in the next one, which is a cache tag, then you would obviously get out of the box, and it's quite explicit. But again, it's all down to preference and style. Some people love tag helpers, some people maybe not so keen. But obviously, I could wrap that partial tag, and I could say it expires at a given date. I could say it expires every, in this case, 2 minutes, 120 seconds, 2 minutes. Or we could vary by, and you've got vary by query, root, cookie, vary by user, and then we've got a vary by. And then I could vary by the model, and I could say every time the page or this template is saved and published, the model is obviously then going to change, or at least the property for last updated date and things like that will have changed. So I could at least look for that property and say, well, if the last published date property has changed, then invalidate the cache and re-render the partial, because maybe I'm using content from that page or something. So you can see that's kind of very useful that Microsoft gives us. And I've created a project that I thought might be useful for some of our own Umbraco related tag helpers. So over on the Umbraco community GitHub organization or place, I've created a new repository called R Umbraco TagHelpers. And now let's zoom in and take a quick look through the README. So you can see it's just a NuGet package, so we can add it from the CLI, or we could use Visual Studio, but the package name or identifier is r.umbraco.taghelpers. So add the package however way you would like. Then you can see, like we've done for the sample that we've done for the if tag, you'll need to update the view imports to include the tag helpers, all tag helpers from our assembly. So the first one up I've created was one called r-dictionary. So you can see, I'm not going to read all of this. You can go and skim it and read it for yourself. But this one takes in a key, so the dictionary key. And if we didn't have a value for home for the current culture, then we would fall back to the value. And obviously this R dictionary is not going to get printed out to the DOM. So it would just do my header, or if we found a dictionary key for, I don't know, Danish, because that's the current culture of the page, and we have a value for home, then obviously we'd print that out instead of my header. Next example underneath is using the current culture for a key, and then if that doesn't have a value, then you could say use a fallback language to use a different culture. And again, if that doesn't specify anything, then fall back to the content that's inside the element. So very useful, saves a lot of logic of if and doing dictionary lookups and things like that in your Razor or in your controller or whatever. I think this is a lot nicer in my opinion. Then we've got the hello world of tag helpers. You can see I've included r-if. You can see the difference here though is that I've done it as an attribute, meaning that this can work on any element. So you don't have to wrap the div in that if tag like we've done previously. I've said that if there is an attribute called r-if, then run a kind of conditional tag helper. So you can see there's my example with the odd and even minutes, and then here you can see an example before using the tag helper. So I would have to do an if this content picker thing on my model was not null, then I could then attempt to get the URL because there's something in the content picker, and assume it has a name. And then if I had another link media picker, I'd have to do another null check, and so on and so on. You can see that now, I suppose this is a little bit more condensed. Again, this is personal preference and styling. Your IDE will show that tealy color. Obviously, the r-if is a tag helper, so it's not native to Angular or Vue.js or whatever client-side framework. So hopefully that will help. But again, this is all opt-in. It's all conditional. You don't have to use this stuff. But in my mind, I think it's helpful. So you can see that all I needed to do, so rather than if the content picker didn't have anything, then we're not going to render out the A tag and its child elements. And if it did, then we could just carry on, and then we've got another conditional on the image. So if there's not an image that's been picked or a media item that's been picked, then don't display the image. Not neater and more compact, but yeah, like I said, I know there's been, when I've done some initial work with tag helpers, there was a bit of a debate if this was helpful or not, or could be confusing. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Next up, we've got our macro. So this is for rendering macros out to the page, or rather than doing HTML dot render macro and then giving it an alias and so on. You can see that I've got a similar approach. We just give it an alias, and that will go and render the macro with the current page that it's on, just like you would normally with when you do HTML render macro. However, I've given it a content attribute. Maybe it should have been called context instead. And this allows you to change the current page context of the macro that is being run. So this list children from current page is a snippet that comes out of the box with Umbraco. Obviously this one and this one is exactly the same because the model of the current page is the same, or because this is expecting an I published content. So in my case, I've done a bit of a dumb example, but I've said the page that I'm on, get me the first child, and now set that as the context or the content to run the macro in. So you can see that's quite powerful. Just by adding that extra attribute, we're able to at least manipulate or at least reuse that macro in a lot more ways. Then the last one, excuse me, is that we have this bind colon syntax. So this is kind of like a dictionary. So previously you would have all your macro parameters, so start node ID. So this is just the syntax. It would bind colon and then whatever the macro parameter alias is, and then it will do its mapping and map those parameters over to the macro. Again, it's in my mind, it's ease of use and being a bit more friendly. If you use it or not, if you think it's helpful or not, is another thing. This next one, though, in my mind, makes a big impact. I always found it weird, especially coming new to Razor, coming on, that we had to do this at using, then HTML begin Umbraco form. Then I would give it the, so that's the name of the surface controller, and then that's the name of the action. Then I want it to be a post. And then I've got to give it an anonymous object to add extra attributes to the form tag. So if I wanted an ID or a CSS class or some no validate attribute added, I'd have to do it like this. And it just looks weird. And obviously someone from more of a front ender experience, or someone who's new to Razor is probably equally confused as why does it have to look like this, and then I have to put my child form elements inside the using. This kind of looks weird. So the improvement is that I have a tag helper that is looking for this R-controller and R-action, and we're passing the surface controller name, so contact form, and that action that we want to run, so submit. And then you can see that the rest is just normal HTML. It could be anything. The tag helper is not then modifying or changing any of these extra attributes that exists on the form tag. And then I can have more. So the rest of these ASP tag helpers is coming from Microsoft. So they've realized that doing HTML text box for and validation message for is a bit weird and a bit verbose as well. And again, if you needed to add extra classes or attributes to the HTML elements, it was a little bit of a pain. Where this way, I can say, look, this input is an ASP for the name or on the model. And so on. You can see that an ASP validation for, I can set it to be a span, it could be a div, it could be any other element, but it's going to put the validation message inside that element if there is a validation error. So again, in my mind, that's a lot neater. It's more readable. But what under the hood this is doing is adding the magic hidden input field that has the Umbraco routing key or token to route the post request to the Surface controller. This next one was very experimental. It's quite verbose or opinionated rather than verbose. Is that it's a language switcher, so it will list all the languages of your Umbraco site. So if you've set up Danish, German, English, and French, and all these other languages, then it would create a list of those languages and cultures that's applied to the site. And for each one, it will list out the root domain of that culture. And as you can see, and if you've read along whilst I've been nattering away, is that this, I'm using some mustache syntax here. So I can control the output of the markup that I'm going to generate. So I am saying print out my language switcher, but first put it in a div. And then with mustache templating syntax, for the languages that get returned from running this language switcher code, for each item, print me out a div, and then I can do any CSS and classes and any other markup. And then for each language in the collection, print out the URL. So that could be mysite.co.uk or mysite.dk. Language is going to be the culture code. So that could be DA-DK, and same for the href lang for being more SEO friendly or semantically correct. Then I can give it a CSS class. I could then say if, so this is an inline Boolean, isn't it? So this is then saying if the current language is selected, then add a selected class to the current item in the list or loop that we're in. And then print out the name of the culture. So again, you can see this is what the output would spit out. In my case, the domains was mapped to /en and /dk. And you can see that the English was selected at the time. So yeah, again, experimental, but kind of useful in my opinion, that we have a way to control the output of what a tag helper could give us. Final one for now is r-svg, and what this does, you can either have a static file on disk from the www root folder, and what it will do is convert this tag into the SVG, or read the SVG file on disk and inline the contents of that file to the DOM. So inline SVGs are useful for CSS styling and animations. So yeah, obviously doing that manually can be cumbersome. So in this way, this is kind of like a helper utility that you would never have been able to do before without TagHelpers. So you can see that the imagination is up to you in terms of what you could and can do with TagHelpers. Obviously, there's going to be something probably specific to your own projects and implementations. But if you think there is something that could be useful for the wider Umbraco community, I invite you to come along and give me either a suggestion in the issues or even submit a pull request. This project as well, just to wrap up, is ready or is contributing for the Umbraco Hacktoberfest, as one of the packages that will give you your kind of contribution towards your Umbraco contributions for Hacktoberfest. So with that all being said and done, hopefully you've learned something new and cool about TagHelpers and how easy they are to use. Go forward, go hacking. I'd love to see anything you do with them. If you do, come and let me know. I'd love to take a look. Cheers, have a good one, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!